Welcome back to the Rural American Surgeon. I'm Dr. Randy Lehman, your host, and today we are wrapping up the Money Miniseries with an episode that, believe it or not, I feel like I've shared quite a lot of personal details already, but is a little bit more raw. It's called When the Dream Doesn't Go as Planned. And this one's a little more personal, and you've heard me talk about principles, investing, giving, freedom, tax strategy, principles, efficiency, legacy, kids. But none of that matters if you haven't also been through disappointment and learned to stand back up. So today I'm going to talk about a few things that haven't gone the way that I thought they would. And I'll share what I've learned about money, about people, about calling, and about how the freedom that financial independence brings is often less about yachts and more about exits. So first, let me tell you this story about how I started Liberty Clinic. When I was graduating high school, my county gave me a scholarship to go to college. It actually came through the Eli Lilly Foundation, which each county in Indiana gets 2 scholarships. Anyway, long story short, I told them I was going to come back home and I was going to make a difference. And I didn't even know what I was going to do. And before that, I didn't even want to go to college. I kind of wanted to go into business or something, entrepreneurial, start something, build something, and work hard. And then I kind of got this scholarship. And so then I said, okay, I'll go to college. I didn't know where I wanted to go. My buddy was going to Purdue. And I was like, I want to go live with him. So I only applied to Purdue. And then I had a day where I was with my principal of my school. He was like, what are you going to college for? I was like, I have no idea. I'm kind of like the person voted most likely to succeed in my high school class, for example. So I'm that guy. And I'm sure it's breaking my principal's heart that he has no idea what he's going to do. And my principal's wife is a pharmacist. He suggested, I told him I wanted to go to Purdue. He said, why don't you go to pharmacy school? So I went to Purdue to pharmacy school over a full ride scholarship, basically. And I didn't really try that hard. I kind of hated it. And I had 4 semesters of declining GPA. And then after 2 years, I applied to pharmacy school and I didn't get in. I don't know if I've told this story before on here, but this is one, I guess, area where the dream didn't go as planned, right? And at that point, I had all these science classes and I didn't really want to waste time. And I had known a couple people that had gone to medical school and I watched, there's 1,000 pre-pharmacy students at Purdue each year and only 100 of them get in. So I'd watched 90% of my classmates essentially switch to easier majors, which is what everybody else was doing. And I was really full of spite and I did not want to do that. And so I said, I'm going to go to med school. I went and I told my pre-med advisor, met with a pre-med advisor, told him that. He's like, this is bad idea. This is not going to work well. Look at your trajectory of your life. And it's unlikely to be successful. Perhaps you want to consider hospitality and tourism management, or whatever. And so I said no. And I actually took a summer physics class and a lot of things hung on that class. And then actually in the very first day of physics lab, I sat down and I had a partner who I told him I'm going to work in Remington. And my partner's like, oh, my dad works in Remington. Who's he? And then basically found out that I was essentially working at the company that his dad owned, who I totally should have known because we have tons of connections and I never met him. And we were like a week apart. And it's actually Brogan Baylor, who's a few episodes back, one of my best friends. And basically they're these little nuggets or Ebenezer's like throughout life that kind of stand to show me that there is a plan. And a lot of times I think I know the plan, but it turns out I never actually do. And then it just kind of goes on without me and it makes sense in the rearview mirror. Brogan was also pre-med and he was working on taking the MCAT and so was I. And so anyway, I got an A in that physics class And then we took the MCAT test prep together, and I got straight A's from then on out, mostly because I was motivated, I think, but partly because I was more selective with the courses that I was taking. I was smarter about it. And I did got 99, I can't remember, like 96th percentile or something like that on the MCAT. And then applied again to pharmacy school, got in and went in, and then turned them down after they accepted me. And I was so vindicated, and then I decided to figured I would get into med school. So, and I did. And then I went to Cincinnati for medical school, and I thought I was going to do emergency medicine. My idea was have a good paying job that was like shift work. And then on the side, then I would be able to do whatever entrepreneurial pursuits that I wanted to, or impact my community. Maybe I wanted to farm, who knows? Then I got to medical school, and I just fell in love basically with surgery. And I always knew I wanted to come back home. And then I discovered that there was a field of rural surgery, and there were actually training programs for rural surgery. And so then I applied, broadly, but I included those programs as I was applying. And several times I got taken back to, what did I tell the scholarship committee when I was leaving town, and how did I feel about it? I felt like my small town had given me a great start. For me, it was, first of all, it was a good childhood. So that helps, having a good family, but I think that doesn't always have to be the case. I think there's a lot of value to the roots of a small town. And I actually found a article that I wrote in high school, I think probably like a FFA thing. It's titled The American Farmer, the Moral Backbone of America, or something like that. This is my bias, obviously, that I'm coming at it with. But I have the bias for a reason. And it's founded in a lot of experience. And so I went to college, or went to medical school, and I discovered, surgery. And then I basically said, I want to be a rural surgeon. I want to come back home to my hometown. And now it's been over a decade that I've been basically saying that exact same thing. And the other experience in medical schools is my mom passing away, which I think I've talked about that. That's a way that the dream didn't go as planned, but it sort of makes sense in the rearview mirror. It made sense also as it was happening. It's another story, maybe for another day. And then I went to Mayo Clinic, and there was some personal, just like improvement that needed to happen, and resetting and going to the Mayo Clinic helped me with that. Maybe not Mayo so much as just changing scenery. And then that led to me getting married. And then we got pregnant on our wedding night. And there's another time where the dream doesn't go as planned, but very exciting. And then I'm always planning ahead quite a bit. And so as an intern, even before I went to medical school, I was calling my hometown hospital and telling them, hey, I want to be back in like Rensselaer, Indiana, in the building that I was born in. But I called them in 2015 before I had a few weeks in between med school and residency starting. And I'm like, I'm going to be in town. Do you guys want to meet with me? Because I'd like to come back here. And they're like, I don't know, the CEOs of the Jasper County Hospital said, we'd like to, but actually we're selling to the Franciscans, not public knowledge yet, but you should know that this is what's going on. So we have to pass it on to them. Well, then, the Franciscans taking over was a totally different story. And they wanted to, they just weren't interested in really talking about it. They didn't recognize the value of what I brought. And they, to illustrate that point, they said, yeah, we'd love to talk to you. Of course, this is like months later after I'm already up in Rochester. And they said, we'd love to talk. Our recruiters are down in Indianapolis. So you could, meet with them down there. And so I did it. I drove all the way down to Indianapolis, or flew home and drove to Indianapolis, and still met with them. But they were basically saying, we're part of a bigger chain, and we don't really, I don't want to be too critical because they just celebrated 10 years of owning this hospital, and they have kept the doors open, and they are investing in the space. And then on the back end, because the hospital's there, it does allow me to do surgery in my hometown. And so what I was going to say is that it doesn't seem like they care about Jasper County. Sometimes it feels like that, but definitely, it feels like they bought the hospital just to ship to their bigger center. But they have their own, I guess, needs and demands. And so I'm not trying to criticize. It's just to say, for you as a listener, if you're a rural surgeon or thinking about rural surgery or training to be a rural surgeon, your value will be seen, I think, more by an independent hospital than it will be by one that's owned by a chain. Because the ones that are owned by the chain are run by people that sit at the big hospitals in the center of the chain. And I found that to be true throughout time. So anyway, that's another way that the thing didn't go as planned. Like, I just thought I was going to go get a job. I kind of wanted to have an independent practice. I wanted to have the brick and mortar thing, but I thought, I'm going to have student loans. Maybe I have get some loan repayment or something. So that's what I was trying to figure out. And then it just didn't really happen. And then we got pregnant, and I went to Honduras with one of my mentors from Central Kentucky, and they had a loan forgiveness program type of thing, or just a recruitment thing. Sign people early in their training so that they'll come back. And he came home and told his CEO, we need to offer this to Randy. And so they did. We thought about taking that job. We went down and interviewed in Kentucky. Then, being that we were pregnant, then said, well, let's think about it. Let's wait till the baby comes. And then as it became closer, it just became obvious we wanted to come closer to home because my wife and I are both from the same area, if for no other reason, for the kids. So I then went on Google Maps to my hometown, and I zoomed out and I searched hospital. And there were 5 hospitals, sort of like the center one, and then 4 around, all like a 5 dice, equidistant. So I called all the hospitals, and basically the ones that were part of a chain told me, call us back when you're a 5, when you're ready to start work. And then the ones that were independent, there were 2, they both said, we'd love for you to work here, and gave me a contract, point blank. There's another place that I also interviewed through a recruitment firm, just because I felt like I shouldn't just take the first job, that was offered. I should look around, and I kind of felt like maybe that was the right thing too. But then I ended up, there was a hospital in Indiana, the next county over, and that's where I ended up deciding to go. And they did give me a great loan repayment package, give me a great start to my practice. And I told them that I wanted to go to my hometown, which is the next county over, and have an independent practice at some point. And it was a 4-year contract, and I thought I would do the 4 years and then leave and save my money, save my pennies in the meantime, and then go over and start an independent practice. Well, then a series of things happened while I was working that first job. First off, I landed in a town of 1,200 people and a county of 12,000 with 3 full-time general surgeons working there. And if you don't know the data, there's 1 general surgeon for every 19,000 population in the United States. And there's a study that says we're underserved, and it should be 1 per 14,000, right? But 3 per 12,000, like everybody would say, So there was very little work, honestly, to be done there. And very quickly, at first I was very happy because it was COVID, and I landed there and there wasn't a ton to do. And I was like, okay, I can decompress. And I did. My wife said she feels like she married a totally different person. I kind of came out of my shell, I guess, or something, because we were in residency the whole first 5 years of our marriage. And then really quickly, I was like, I'm not going to be able to maintain my skills with this low of volume. And I did actually quite quickly pick up, mostly because I went to my hometown community and I talked to all the doctors and I explained my deal, and people started referring to me for everything from all over. I also had, after a year, some extra vacation time. And so then I ended up taking that time to go do some locums work. And that was paid vacation kind of, but still doing surgery. And, even me, I go my missions, I go and I do surgery. So, there's a way to make sure that you stay very busy. And then very quickly, I was like last year, my productivity was the highest. It was actually too high. It's like capping out at, my goal was to do 10,000 RVUs, and I did. And that, I just wanted to see how it felt. And how it felt is I don't really want to do that, but like 8,500 is no problem. It's just, you can kind of gauge it off of that. And I think it's probably based off other things that are going on in your life too, but I digress. And the conclusion of what happened there at my first job is I actually started getting privileges at my hometown hospital mostly because the privileging process was ran so poorly initially that I couldn't do anything for quite a while when I first started. And I just figured I'd get privileges and whatnot. I didn't even know what I didn't know, because there's hospital privileging and credentialing, and then there's insurance credentialing. How would I, I had no idea. But in the process of doing that, I'm talking to the CEO of my hometown hospital. This would be the place that, was purchased by the Franciscans. And he was very helpful. And then something terrible happened. A surgeon at that hospital had a debilitating stroke, and he was running wound care for them several days a week and doing general surgery. And then it became like this emergency where they wanted me to come over there. Well, then I approached the first hospital that I was working at, next county over, and I explained the situation. And then I said I wanted to go over there like independent, and so we ended up working out a thing where it was, and I said, it's going to be good for you because I'm going to have things that they don't have the capabilities there that we do here. I'm going to, be, there will be natural flow of patients over here. Like, you don't need to be scared about me, not being invested in not doing things here. But I'm planning to go there at some point anyway. And I think they wanted to prove that I could do both at the same time. And so then they agreed to let me do it. And we put it on paper and said I was allowed to have a limited independent part-time practice over in my hometown. And then one of the days I was walking into the hospital to like work on this stuff in the new hospital where I was born. Doctor comes walking out and he says, kind of recognize him. I never talked to him before. I'm like, are you Dr. Darnaby? And he's like, yeah. Looks at me kind of weird, if you know him, then, he's creeped out or whatever. And I just jump right into my elevator speech. I say, I'm Randy Lehman, and, I'm from here, and I'm a surgeon, and I want to come back here. And by the way, and at this time I was thinking about buying a building downtown and putting in my own like little office. I guess I kind of imagined copying some of the law firms downtown, or something. I don't know. And I said, by the way, you should sell me your building someday. And I pointed right across the street from the hospital at this building that was where I grew up going as a kid to the doctor. And he kind of looked at me sort of oddly and said, it's funny that you mentioned that because we just had it appraised and we're planning on auctioning it this fall. So I'm like, whoa, and then he has me over like that evening, talk about it. And I end up buying the building and the surrounding property. They gave me a very fair deal on it. It just kind of fell in my lap. Then I find out, well, I knew that my mom had worked here, but she actually worked here until my due date. That was the last day that she worked here. And this is actually the building. I'm sitting in it now in the basement. That's where my podcast studio is, where my wife and I actually first met. And I had to go back home to get my shots for medical school. I mean, I guess I kind of theoretically we knew of each other because we went to the same high school, a couple of years apart, never really, talked or knew each other. And they had a rule here. She was working as a medical assistant. And if somebody has to get their blood drawn because everybody knows everyone else, I guess the old rule was if you pick up the chart, you have to go draw the blood regardless of who they are. So she picked up the chart and I guess she threw the chart down because I guess I was, a bit of a annoying loudmouth, from high school. And somebody saw her do it. One of the old nurses, they said, you have to go in there. And so she comes in and draws my blood. And literally that's like the first time that I talked to my wife, and then she Facebook friended me, and we became friends. And long story short, 6 years after that, I believe, we walked down the aisle. And on our 1-year wedding anniversary, my wife bought me a framed silhouette of the state of Indiana with a little heart coordinates for this building, like kind of tongue in cheek, cute, but like as the place that we met, And I had almost forgotten about that. I mean, I was reminded and I remembered, but I would not have thought of it. And then I'm like closing on this property, and Brittany finds that and shows it to me. And it's like this whole round circle thing. And it just felt so like I was doing the right thing. And several other things happened. People fell into my lap. So there was somebody still working for the existing clinic that was doing credentialing, who my parents had she was a single mother, and my parents had babysat her son, like when I was, a baby. And she was helping with my credentialing and all these other connections. I'm not thinking of all of them right now. I know there's more, but I even said at the time that usually my life makes sense 10 years later. But at this time, it was making sense as I went along. And I was like, God was sort of revealing his will, as it was happening. I felt like I was doing the right thing and everything. Great, except and a nurse practitioner fell into my lap. That's another thing, who is just awesome. And just like sort of serendipitously. And then another, an MA who was actually a classmate of mine, who was like perfect for the position and had like the perfect experience, kind of like reached out to me, and all this time, like all the pieces came together. My dad also in some ways got like pushed out of a job that he was in for a long time, but we were talking for decades about trying to do something together. So then he had started this other job, but was less tied, and more feeling free and able. And he kind of was then able to leave that and join me, and has been working for me full time ever since, helping me along. We bought this building. We're like bootstrapping it. We loved it. I like had a couple mattresses that I threw down on the floor in a small building that's part of the clinic space, and I'm like staying in there with my family on like Monday nights, after I do surgery and stuff. And like truly, you think back, like those are the good times, of course. And we knew that they were, because we put little kids to bed, and then, we'd get chicken wings from the place in town where I'm going to go right after this and get some. And we would just eat it like on the table in the clinic, and everything felt like great. But then what I ended up building, what I didn't know, is I didn't really have a good business plan. And what ended up happening was my overhead was like $600,000 a year. By the time I built everything that I thought that I needed, it mostly was payroll. Over half was payroll. And my total collections was $350,000 annually. And that was with me kind of part-time, understanding that some of the surgeries weren't appropriate for that hospital. So I was doing them at my W-2 job. And so I guess I was getting paid, on a bonus from them. But the reality is I built a business. So that's between me and my nurse practitioner, both those collections, that was losing like $20,000 to $30,000 a month. And I was coming out of pocket to pay these expenses. Certain other things had happened, like real estate things that I had done, the savings and investings that I had done that was sort of funding this. But it was still not sustainable. And it got very stressful, very frustrating. It was hard to talk to nurses at the hospital who worked for the hospital and were getting paid hourly. And then when there's like easy things to be like some case gets canceled for a stupid reason, and it's their fault, but they don't really care. And they're like, just reschedule. Right. But I have limited, like, that's like my margin. It's not even my margin. I'm losing money. I went on a mission trip to Africa, and I was with Brittany. There were some people over there that like they charged him for the surgery, but the amount that they charged him is much less, obviously, than surgery costs. It's super cheap, right? But they still charged him something so that it wasn't abused. So it'd be like $85 for an inguinal hernia, And some of the people still couldn't pay that. And Brittany and I paid for several of the operations while I was over there. And I'm standing there doing an inguinal hernia that I paid $85 for the person to be able to do on my volunteered time. And meanwhile, that same year, the average loss that I had per case that I did with Liberty Clinic loss was $2,000. I literally paid $2,000. It's almost unimaginable amounts of money, And I, for like the previous whatever, I had studied it. And so I knew that. And I said, man, Brittany, it'd be a lot cheaper if I just move over here and we could just, operate on these people, because it's cheaper to operate on them than it is in Indiana. And that got very stressful. And it came to a point in late 23 where, like Brittany and I did something we don't normally do. We're driving home from church and we just like said this prayer out loud, like while we were driving. And I basically, there were other things that I was trying to make work. Like I thought what needed to happen is I needed to contract my business to the hospital. And really that's what ended up happening. That's kind of a spoiler alert, but I was trying for a long time, like a year, to get this contract, and it just wasn't coming through. And I'm like, what do I not know? Like that, is there something they're like really trying not to make this contract with me or what? And then my building, the space, then I wouldn't be using anymore. And I was told that the urgent care in town was going to add on to their space because they were kind of all over, just like didn't have enough space. My building was bigger. I'm like, and that's part of the same hospital system. I'm like, they just need to move into my building, because it's bigger. It'll be perfect. It's already built out like medical office, be a lot cheaper, And so I'm trying to reach out to the person to do that. And I call like several times and the phone is like glitching and the call's not coming through. I left voicemails, not hearing anything back, just like, and I just felt completely hopeless. Like I felt like I knew what the right things were, like that the practice could be contracted and, rent my space out. And the blocks were up, like it's like not getting into pharmacy school. The door is shut. And there's these phrases that you hear in life that are buzzword phrases, like one door shuts, another door opens. Okay. But you can say that sounds very cute and trite, but what's it really mean? Until you have a little bit of experience and it colors it, then you don't know. And a lot of these risks in this situation that I was able to put myself in, even buying the building in the first place, they happened because of financial independence and because I had a financial margin. And it happened because I took a job with a high guaranteed salary. And I bought a house that was whatever it was, like $80,000. And that just didn't matter. And so I had so much margin because I still drove my truck, which I still drive right now, that I bought in residency for $5,000. And the tailgate's all ripped up and my kids' names are scratched in the side with a rock. And I don't really care. Matter of fact, it's a point of pride because the great irony of it is when I take off for work in the helicopter, and the reality of this, everything about my situation is just so like bonkers now but it all started with that extreme frugality and like hard work ethic, trying to earn and save, invest, thinking about, things in a way that I've talked about throughout this whole series. So anyway, we had this prayer driving in the car. And the prayer was, I cannot do this anymore. I felt like you, God, wanted me to do this. Like there were these obvious signs like you're supposed to do this and it is not working. And it is unreasonable for you to continue to ask me to do this because it's not working. And do you want to say hi? Jackson, here, he's with me. He gives me a little note. When are we going to leave from the side so that the camera can't see him? So I have to write, 15 minutes. So I got to wrap this up, I guess. So anyway, if the prayer was, I'm done. I'm shutting this down. If you want it to work, feel free, but I feel like I've done everything I can. And I have to shut this down, which means firing people and shutting down the team and this dream of having my dad working with me. And now maybe he has to go get another job. And then these people that I had developed relationships with. And it was very sad. And the Christmas party the year before was like very exciting, a lot of growth. And then we I didn't even want to have a Christmas party that year. And we kind of did, but we just went to dinner and it was just morose, Well, that was on a Sunday afternoon on our way home from church. And the next day I get a call from the urgent care, the guy that I'd been trying to get a hold of. And like I said, my phone is glitching and the door was shut and the door opened. Right. And it moved quickly. And because of all my experience with real estate, like when they're asking for tenant improvements and a build out and stuff, it was because of the experience that I had in real estate that I was comfortable moving forward with a lot of the things that we talked about and was able to negotiate with them and kind of know what they were saying. And probably that's the reason that the deal went through. And then within a week or two, I can't remember. It was very quick. I had the contract that I'd been trying to get for probably almost a year in my email inbox, right? And it all kind of came together very quickly. And within about a month, I was working on that contract. I had righted a lot of my overhead. I was not making money. I was breaking even, but I wasn't losing $20,000, $30,000 a month. And I don't think that I've written a check to my business since that moment, which I just made that realization right now that since I made that prayer, I'm not sure. I'll have to fact check my own self on that, but it's something like that. Everything got better at that moment. That moment of basically surrender and giving up, maybe something that I was clutching onto, maybe something that I thought was mine. And I was treating it like mine, I guess. And then sort of in preparing for this podcast, I thought to myself, if I'm done with this show, this is the last of the Money Miniseries. What do I want to say? And I guess I want to say why I feel like I started the podcast, the Money Miniseries, by saying, what's the purpose of life, right? But what's the purpose of me doing the Money Miniseries podcast? It's for me to share with you my experiences and also my perspectives and opinions and why I have them so that it can help you in your life in some way. And, yes, it's probably, I should say that it's legally for entertainment purposes only, and whatnot. But I do want other people to have success. And so in preparing for this, I thought, what does the Bible say about money? Because that's a good maybe framework. And the first thing that I was looking at is that the main thing God says is that God owns everything and we're just stewards, and the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. We have to say everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us. Right. And so money is a stewardship issue, not a possession issue. And sometimes if you're holding too closely to anything, like whether it's your family, whether it's your health, whether it's, it's hard to be driven on the one hand and a steward at the same time. So you want to be like a good steward that works really hard with what you have, makes the most of it, right? Good and faithful servant turns the 10 talents into 10 more talents, but without it necessarily feeling like what you're doing is because of you. It's because it's actually not. And it can be taken away and the doors can be shut. And I've experienced it. It's a very healthy, just sort of peaceful way of thinking about it. And I have one more thing that has now recently happened. So basically that pivoted into this 1099 contracting business that is now Liberty Clinic, where basically I go in as a contractor to rural hospitals. And I meet them and give them whatever they need. They tell me what they need, and then I tell them what I can offer, and then we find mutually beneficial things. And I'm coming at it with a team. Now I've hired my first surgeon. I don't know if I've said that here on the podcast yet, but I've hired a doctor that does endoscopy for us, and I've also now hired a surgeon, 2 APPs, and we're actually growing in a sustainable, good way where other people are able, to win. Nobody's losing, and the mission is being, sort of carried out. But just a few weeks ago, I got a call. The first hospital that I had started at, where I was an employee, I got a great start. Helped me with my loans to get repaid, was flexible, allowed me to show that I could work at more than one place. Then I converted that to a 1099 contract because I was getting to the point where I felt that it wasn't really right to say that I'm, at some point I'm not a full-time employee there anymore. And I found this model to be so successful. I kind of feel like it's the future, where, employment was sort of a new concept 20 years ago. Now this is a new concept. This kind of 1099 contracting, or, as Todd Stilson would call it, the micro corporation. That's kind of like the new thing. And I'm in some ways leading the way here. And I felt like we had moved to a very sustainable thing that was very helpful and beneficial. And I got a call that my contract was terminated. And it wasn't about patient care. It wasn't about outcomes. And it wasn't even a budget issue. It was politics. End of the day, there's one person that didn't want me there. And I don't need to dive into the whole story, but there's phrases and quotes like about, peace is everything, or protect your peace, or quotes about toxicity and whatnot that you don't understand until you sort of live through it. And I had a scenario like that at my first job, to the point where I called mentors like shortly after I started, like a few months after I started, and I got advice that I should immediately leave. And I stayed anyway. And you're surgeons basically, listening to this podcast. So let me give you an example of like what happened repeatedly for years. Not too extreme, because I really tried to distance myself, but it was tough. So I had a patient that had rectal cancer, and showed up in my office with a CT shows near obstructing rectal mass, but she's not obstructed. She's still passing some stool and gas. But there's some like loss of haustra, like it's getting close. Sigmoid. And I was doing some colonoscopies. And so I had seen some poor preps, and I knew I wanted to try and scope above this mass if possible and rule out any synchronous tumor, because there's a 10% risk of it. And so I wanted to prep her and get a colonoscopy. And so another surgeon at the hospital was there in clinic, doing clinic as I was. And I said, I just wanted to ask a question, like, have you ever done a 2-day prep? I didn't really know all the details about all the preps. I'm like still kind of feeling it out. There's so many things you don't know when you first start. You're just kind of doing a lot of reading and asking people. And the concepts, core concepts, but you don't really know like some of the little details, because someone was taking care of it for you in residency. And so I asked that question about doing a 2-day prep, and then the person kind of digs into the story and then starts telling me like, well, you can admit the patient and you can just do the colonoscopy on the weekend. And, if you can just go ahead and go straight to an operation, because like clearly they're near obstructing. And I'm like, no, like I think I'm going to be able to do this in very like short order. And I'd like to name it, stage it, and then treat it, and, if I can do it right and she's not metastasized, give her the best operation, and then possibly, and this is like a lady in her 80s. And I said, maybe I could, resect it and then, give her anastomosis and not have to do it emergently, and, give her a colostomy. And then he just roared and he said, what? And this is in my clinic in front of the secretary and the two MAs that are shared, right? And this is an experienced surgeon that's in town. And in front of those people, roars and says, "What? You're thinking about putting this lady back together? If she leaks, she's dead." And I was very taken aback because that's not a true, as you know, that's not a true statement. And just how it was said, and in the way, in this very intentional way that it was said in front of key people, right? And anyway, I was in the stage where I was still doing my OPPE. And so, because he was involved in the case, I did it the way I described. Like I did a 2-day prep. I scoped her, listed her for, staged her, CT chest, abdomen, pelvis, and CEA, and there's no mets. And so we're going for an operation. And the intention is a reconstruction. And so at this point, I still have to have another surgeon with me because we're doing this OPP thing. And then I go and I'm in the operating room, and I choose him to come with me to the operating room because he already knew about the patient. And we get in there, and one thing that it was a mess. It's very difficult to do the case, with him. And then there was a fair amount of bleeding. We got the mass out, but in the middle of doing that, I had not done a type and screen. And that was like a big thing that was brought up in the middle of the case. And the whole case had to be halted for like 30 minutes to like him to go under the drapes and draw blood and make a big deal about it. And then, of course, by this time, then pressures are getting a little soft. And I kind of like mentioned, what happened is there was about this much and I know it's audio for some people, so it's about maybe 4 or 5 inches of distal colon that where I had transected, there's like a cuff, and then the descending colon's coming down. And so I'm looking at it, and I had this question before. I think the right answer is just to resect down to the pelvic brim and then to put an anvil and just bring it down and do a colorectal anastomosis. But, the thought crosses your mind, why don't you just do a side-by-side anastomosis there, because there is enough reach. And so I asked that question. I said, so what would you do here? Would you put a side-by-side anastomosis here, or would you resect this and bring it down? And the response in front of, the only anesthesiology provider in town and several nurses of our group of 5 total nurses and 4 total techs and several techs was, "What? You're still thinking of putting her back together? If she leaks, she's dead." That's the roaring response. And I mean, it was shocking. And before the case, there was like a conversation, which was, "Hey, this is your case, and I'm just here to like do your OPPE and basically support you, and whatever you decide, that was like this quiet conversation before the case, right? And then in the middle of the case, that was the interaction. And then he said, "You know what? If you want to put this patient back together, then you can do what you feel you need to do. And I will leave the case, and you can proceed however you want." I'm like, what? So I said, "You can leave, and I'm not going to put her back together because I know if she leaks that it's going to be essentially raise a crucifix for old Dr. Lehman, but I'm going to do, a Hartman's and live to fight another day. But you are excused, and I can handle it from here." And he left, and that was the last time we ever did any case together. I think, to my knowledge, I can't really remember, but it definitely should have been if it wasn't. And then that scenario, and I don't want to. I have tons of stories, obviously, that I could tell, but I don't want to. I'm telling this not for my own self to feel better, but for you to understand reality of a lot of people come on the show and they beat around the bush about, I had a toxic partner. But like, what does that really look like? And I got a call. I don't remember if this was before or after, but right around the same time, like a month or two into practice from my program director. And I was like, program director said, "Hey, how's it going? How's practice?" I'm like, wow, this is so cool. My program director cares about me enough to, I'm oblivious, to call and check in on me. I was so happy. And I went on and on about how great it was and how much better it was in residency. And he says, "Oh, is everything great?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's awesome. Is there anything that's bad at all?" I'm like, no, everything's awesome." He goes, "Okay." It's like, nothing at all. And then I'm like, "Well, there's this one thing." And I start talking about this guy. And he said, "That's funny that you," after I then go on a big rant about that, right? And he just listens. He goes, "Yeah, it's funny. I thought you might say that because yesterday evening or yesterday afternoon, he called me and he's clearly trying to dig up dirt on you." And then I got advice that was, be very careful, because he told me about a surgeon that he knew who was in the metro area and was a good surgeon and basically got on somebody's bad side and basically got blacklisted from all the hospitals in the area and then worked out his career as a urgent care physician, and kind of like brought that warning to me, And then I talked to another mentor about the situation. And he said, "Quit, leave." I talked to other people and they said, "You trust your training and you have broad shoulders, and just stand up and just make your practice immaculate and trust your training and things." And essentially, long story short, that's what I did. I implemented a strategy called gray rocking, which you can look up on your own, and that worked. It's understanding some of, like I said before, these crazy quotes that don't make sense until you live through it. Like, again, say, "Protect your peace," or "Don't stay where you're not valued," or "Freedom is being able to walk away," right? And that's where the financial piece comes in. I'd heard those things for years, but it wasn't until I had my name on contracts and I got betrayed in meetings and I watched good work go unrecognized. And I felt that knot in my stomach walking into certain buildings, that I finally understood what the quotes meant, because experience is the translator of those ideas. And once they're translated, then you can't unhear that true meaning. So I stayed and I kept working, and then things became revealed to me later. But I got to say that my motivation to do some of the things like the locums, and even to have the idea of going to Liberty Clinic, helped me to sort of have a bug out bag, if you will. And I felt like I needed to protect myself. And that's how I did it, is I gave myself more options than just one place. And also even investing just in general, like in real estate or saving, and also living well below my means. All of those things gave me freedom to be able to stomach when things don't go the way they were planned. So that's the message, I guess, that I'm trying to share with this Money Miniseries to you, is to offer you some practical tips and tricks, and to perhaps inspire you to spend less money on personal spending and be less on the hamster wheel, number one, by throttling back expenses and having a nice big margin, no matter what your income is, having a nice big margin and buying back your freedom and having that, that sort of emergency fund, if you will, and streams of other income so that you can live off of it, because then you can choose, to do the thing. And a last topic, which is kind of weird, is leadership. And people talk about it like it's a personality type or a title. But in my experience, leaders are the ones that do things first. Imagine a leader going through the jungle, right? And slashing through things, paving a way. And they're the ones who pave the way. They go somewhere hard, make a way, and then they wave others through it. Like, "You're good now. Just follow this path." And that's lonely. And sometimes it feels like you're the only one doing the hard part while other people reap the benefit. And there's quotes like to that effect, like an Eleanor Roosevelt quote is, "A good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader. A great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves." this is an example of one of those quotes that like, okay, sounds good. But then once you actually do the work for a longer period of time, you start to realize these things. And that's the most rewarding part. I've got one example who is a virtual medical assistant that I hired because I'm like throwing everything at the wall just to see what sticks when I'm starting my independent practice, and I'm reading everything about it, trying all kinds of things. And I checked in with her recently and I said, how are things going? I updated myself. Hey, doc, it's so nice to hear from you. Or no, you no longer with the same company. I'm now focusing on my startup business, my very own VA agency. You and Liberty Clinic have been such an inspiration for me to pursue what I truly love, just like how you started Liberty Clinic. I'm now building something of my own. If you know of anyone looking for a skilled virtual assistant for their practice, I'd be grateful if you could refer them to Carefree VA. And I would, to be clear, I'm not planning on advertising for her, but I would endorse Lou 100%. She says it's wonderful to know that you and everyone at Liberty Clinic are doing so well. So that is, I was floored. There's another quote that says, leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. And it doesn't make sense until a little bit of life experience sort of shows you that. And another quote is, great leaders encourage leadership development by openly developing themselves. And to a certain degree, that's what I'm doing right here. And I have a one sheet, which is all my goals kind of written for multiple categories. And I do that through the business mastermind that I'm in. And there are 5 like bucket list things. People write things on their bucket list, like, go to Antarctica or something. I don't have a lot of things like that. But one of the things that has been consistently ever since my first one sheet on there is be a leader in the space of rural surgery nationally. And I like podcasts. I like talking. I have things that I feel like I want to say. That's why I have this show, but also it fills this thing. It's part of my give back. And that's what when I say give back, right? It's leadership is not about the person. I want to be the leader, right? But what is leadership? Leadership is giving back. It's developing other people. It's showing other people the way. It's paving the way, doing something that nobody else is doing, which is very much a lonely thing. And it's very much what I have felt over the past 5 years now. Not lonely, because I have extremely awesome people, starting first with my wife, who just unbelievably supports me unconditionally. There was a point where I was at a meeting and I was talking to some people about a business meeting, right? One of my masterminds. And I was talking about my investment strategy. I was talking about how much debt I was taking on and my goals for the next year. And they said, "Did your wife, you should not do this. Your wife, does she know what you're doing? Does she understand? Because there's no way she does." I actually called her in. She came in early to the meeting and then stayed the last night with me. And I said, "Look, I'm feeling very convicted about this. This is what I'm doing. I want to make sure that you're totally clear." She listened to the whole thing. She said, "Yeah, I know that's what we're doing." And she goes, I said, "That means we could go bankrupt. We could lose everything." She goes, "Yeah, that's okay. I'm there with you. No matter what, it's probably not going to happen. It's calculated. But even if that happens, I'm still going to be right next to you and loving you, supporting you." She tells me so many times how she, supports me. And to have a person like that in your corner is incredible. Also, my dad, and I've got a good friend, Ryan, who the two of them are, just incredible supporters and incredible people. So there's other people too that I'm not naming, but when you have these people that sort of know the real you and then they can be behind you, don't forget them and try, I'm speaking to myself here as much as anybody else to recognize that support and recognize how you're not doing it by yourself. There's no possible way. So this has been a bit of a long episode and somewhat of a long journey. And if you've listened to the full series, thank you. Thanks for being here. If this is your first episode, go back. We've talked about purpose, frugality, investing, taxes, efficiency, giving, legacy, kids, and now resilience. Now, I've told stories that I've never shared before. I'm a little nervous about it, but this is the real stuff. It's the kind of stuff that I wish that someone had told me before the first dream died, before I learned how to pivot. But that's part of the story, right? But now, I'm facing right now a very new thing. Like at this moment, I'm still working in a contract in a place where I actually want to be, with a model that I thought was a long-term model that I just renegotiated a few months ago. And that has been terminated, sort of surprisingly. And now that's just put it up as another way that the dream didn't go as planned. But I'm not really worried about it at all. I have a lot of peace. I don't, and a lot of that stems from, again, the financial independence. But even that, like, something could happen that we could go into a big global recession and I could get vacancy and I could get taken down by my own portfolio. Even if that happens, and there's much worse things that can happen than that. My nurse practitioner got a cancer diagnosis like within the past year, in her early 30s. People die. So it's not just little things like losing a job. It's having that open hand, ability to pivot, and understanding there's always something bigger going on, and trying to like have that calm in the storm that comes with experience and wisdom. And that's why I would recommend that you make margin and you build, but build wisely, give generously. Don't let the dream own you. And that's it for the Money Miniseries. It's the real story. And you heard it here on The Rural American Surgeon. And I'm your host, Dr. Randy Lehman. And I'll see you on the next episode of the show.